Section 4 is composition, encapsulation, and polymorphism. During this section, we will speak about how to make a class with the usage of different classes, how to create a private scope inside of the function, and also how to make different methods with the same name but working differently depending on the instance that are laying in. In this video, I will explain you what is closure and how can be closure used in order to create a module pattern. In JavaScript, objects are key value properties, and all of those properties are public. So we cannot make property of object that is not accessible as part of this object. So we don't have a hermetization that is a built-in mechanism of objects. Nevertheless, we have something that can emulate such a behavior. And this mechanism is connected to scopes of functions. So when we have a function and we introduce any variable inside of this function, this variable will be seen only within those curly braces. So when we go out of this function, we cannot access A. Therefore, we can return another entity, for example, another function, and this another function can have an access to the variables that are introduced inside of the outer function. So this is called a scope inheritance. Function that is inside of another function will have an access to the external function scope. So thanks to this, we can make a variable, and this variable is an output of first function and then called the output as the output is the function, and the result of the returned function is variable A. So we can also split it into two statements. So first it is to produce a function that is returned, and then a value that is returned by this function. So thanks to this, we can make some kind of privacy that is here, and this privacy can be then used inside of the scope of the function that is inheriting the scope of the outer function. And this behavior can be used when instead of function, we would return a normal literal object. So having object like this object can access some properties that cannot be accessed from outside of the object. So for example, we can make a method. This method will return A, and now we cannot change this A in any way. So returning an object like this, it will produce an entity that has access to the scope of the function that is returning this object. We can have different kind of statements that can deal with any kind of logic that is put inside of this function body. Having mechanism like this, we can produce object that will have access to some private area, and we can create this object via function that is returning object literal, but we can also create this object with the function that is invoked immediately. So with the construct that we have a function body that is inside the curly braces, and we add another curly braces, it means that the function that is described here will be immediately invoked. So the result of this function will be passed to the variable. Thanks to this, we will have an object literal that have access to some private part that is not accessible from the outside. So this will produce us the object that have two properties, and the logic of those properties will give us the access to this scope. This kind of mechanism is called module pattern. So module pattern is to have an object returned by self-invoking function, and thanks to this the object will have access to the private area, so to the scope of the function that is returning the object. The function can be named, but can be also anonymous. So when we cross out the name of the function, it will work just the same without naming. As this function is being called once it is described, it is often no need of having the name of the function, as we carry the name that is returned by this function. This approach is called module pattern. So this property is carrying an object that has some private area accessible, so we have a module. In the current version of JavaScript, we have native modules, so we can use import and export keywords. But before ES 2015, this module pattern was the only way of creating something that was similar to namespace in other languages. So the libraries, they were just providing the modules, so the object that had some public parts and some private area.